This is the End of the Road podcast with your host, Michael Coco. Exploring the horizons we never touch because we're already there.
Welcome, 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 and thanks for listening. Tonight we're off in a dome home in a sacred valley in an undisclosed location in southern Colorado to speak with Robin Lassiter Honeyheart. We're talking all about her wonderful book, Earth, a Love Story, which is heart-wrenching, poignant, and insightful. And this is the first podcast we've had with a quote-unquote experiencer. Yay! And there was much rejoicing. And in the land of budding Bibles, as Whitman used to say, maybe experiencers like Robin are like the new prophets. But maybe experiencers have always been prophets, going back to as far as characters like Zoroaster or Ezekiel or Siddhartha Gautama. And I'm still waiting for the day when the paranormal becomes the new normal and we see what we've always experienced and avoided. Or at least what I've avoided. And maybe the wonderful little secret is that we are all prophets and all of experience is a prophecy. But not all of us write books as wonderful as Earth, a Love Story. So without further ado, let's get to it with the four who are one, as experienced by Robin, or the one who is for mischief, which is me, with Robin Lassiter. You know, Robin, we're doing this interview around the noon hour, and do you ever get the feeling that sort of it would be a much different conversation if it was in the early morning hours versus the noon hour, that we almost become different people with the rising of the sun, especially when the sun is high? It's like Apollo. Now we're all reasonable people as opposed to dreamy, more it just seems like we sort of resonate with different sort of frequencies at the noon hour, I think, compared to other times.
Yeah, gosh, that's so interesting. I was thinking something similarly this morning. I was thinking about morning me is so on it and so, ready to dive in and do spiritual practice. And then noon me is a completely different person. And then night me is, evening me is a different person. And of course, dreamer me, sleeping me, those experiences, I'm someone else altogether. So I was actually just thinking about that. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, you a lot of your book is dealing with sort of your dream journals, and those, my experience, I'll write a dream and then I'll think it's, great and interesting. And then in the middle of the day, I'm thinking, what the hell was that all about? It's, I don't know, it's a blessing or what. It's just like a different sort of reality. Maybe we are sort of porous creatures and we sort of resonate with sort of the energies of the sun and the different, or I don't know. Do you have any theories on that?
I've heard of that in spiritual lineages and traditions. And I think that Gordon White talks about that, actually, about kind of chronos and time and how things are different at different times. I don't know enough about that, the kind of connection into lineage and mythology and things like that. I just know that for me, yes, it feels like absolutely different realities, different me's, different versions of me, for sure.
Yeah. Well, speaking sort of the malleability of reality, there are so many insights that you had in your book that really stuck with me, and in no particular order. If you don't mind, I'd like to start with the one you talked about with the bees and the honeycombs, and sort of the underlying structure of reality is malleable, and it responds to where you place your attention and the quality of your attention. I
Yeah.
just love that. I mean, have you had any other insights in that since you wrote that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's very alive for me right now. I had that experience in early 2021 following uh, about a year of increasing discomfort, increasing fear. I felt sort of badgered and haunted, and finally reached out for support and started doing some basic kind of protection and team building practices with the unseen world. And seemingly as if in response to my um, sense of safety and self and support that was being cultivated during that time, I had an out of body experience, which I'd had many times before, and they had often felt quite terrifying. This time, I felt sort of the vibrations and the phasing sensation that seems to happen for me with out of body experiences, and I consented because I did feel so safe. And when I did that, this whole journey ensued, which started with an out of body experience and culminated with me being seemingly back in my body, back in my bedroom, and four beings walking through my bedroom wall. And as they were walking in, I was looking around and noticed that there seemed to be this honeycomb structure that was changing in response to where I was looking. And all of this happened very quickly, and I've gone into it, like broken it down in great detail as much as I can. But the gist was, as I was noticing this changing reality around me, and that it was changing based on where I looked, these four beings walked through the bedroom wall, stood next to my bed, and said, "This is behind the scenes." And I felt like they were using air quotes when they said that, although they didn't give me air quotes. They said, "This is behind the scenes of reality. This is what your reality hangs on. Reality responds based on where you place your attention and the quality of your attention. And you need to learn to use the operating system of reality." And you know, I should have had better questions or something better to say, but I said, am I not in my body? I need to get back in my body. And I felt like I was in my body. It was a very tangible, it felt very much in reality, but I didn't know what else this could be. And when I said that, it all immediately shifted back to seeming normal reality. So, as I think many people have experienced, often we can get these really big experiences or big downloads, and then they sort of play out through time. And that's what's happened. And it continues to happen with me with the honeycomb matrix. It's, I understood what they were saying. I felt like they were kind of calling me into a phase of almost manifestation or of seeing the mirror like nature of reality.
Right.
And I've historically been so allergic to that because of damaging things to me during the New Age movement. Like I really internalized spiritual bypassing, and like if you think happy thoughts and then your life isn't good, it means that you're not doing it right. And so I had really started to push back against the language of that. And here they were telling me to lean into manifestation and reality creation, and I resisted. And now it's been almost 4 years, and I'm really starting to understand it more and more and dive into it. And what I understand is, I think the closest analogy that I can use is that life is dreamlike. That in some ways this is a lucid dream, and in some ways it does change based on where we place our attention and the quality of that attention. And so I'm slowly venturing into experimentation with that, and it feels really alive for me right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and oh, that's wonderful. That's been my experience too. I've sort of resisted sort of the manifestation dogma, or the idea behind like ceremonial magic, for that you can sort of summon and create something. And sort of my thought is, sometimes I can go into the forest, and if I'm sitting here trying to conjure something, it's going to be nowhere as interesting as if I sort of can become a vessel and connect with something that's sort of transcending any sort of thought form that my meager body can create. I mean, there's just so much more in reality that's beyond our control. So why would we think that we can sort of control this little thing and it would be interesting? But yet on the flip side of that, this is, when you said that, it really resonated with sort of a meditation practice that, it's exactly right. What you sort of focus on becomes your reality in so many ways. And that just, and I don't think, like you sort of alluded to in the book, I don't think this quote has caught up with me yet, but there's a lot of power in it. There's definitely a lot of power in it. I don't know if you feel the same. I get the feeling you feel the same way about it too.
I do. I feel like there's a lot of power in it. And I love that. I love that, what you're talking about going into the forest or sort of trying to force a manifestation of some kind. If it were that simple, we would all do it. And maybe we are all doing it all the time, but we would solve, there would be peace. There would be, we'd all have money and cars and whatever we wanted, so there's something else going on there. But yeah, there is a lot of power to it. And what you said as well about being a vessel, that as I'm exploring this and I'm being called deeper and deeper into this particular sort of teaching that they gave me, what I'm feeling is that it is about sort of being a space that kind of life in the mystery moves through, but it does matter what that space is kind of oriented towards, or what the frequency of that space is. Is it clouded by my own shadow aspects? Is it sort of muddy and unfocused because my mind is muddy and unfocused? So I think that the real clues in there are where we place the attention and the quality. So those two words, where and the quality. And that's what I'm working with. Like, what's the quality of my attention, and then where am I pointing it? And it's, these things, I got what I feel like was a really profound teaching back in about 2012. And, that's been 12 years, and I'm still learning from it. I'm still deepening into it. It still is teaching me. So I imagine that the honeycomb matrix will remain that. I don't think I'm going to have it figured out anytime soon, but the journey of it is the gold,
Right. Well, you want to go to the next insight that you had that's sticking with me?
Yes, please.
Okay, this is from I believe it's your purple robed lady. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, and so this is another visitor you had that said, and I'm paraphrasing that, unless bodies are relatively close in frequency, they can't move to a new paradigm. And that also is very powerful, but it's not something my sort of intellectual mind understands, but there's a part of me that understands that.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah. That is the teaching that I got in 2012 that I was just talking about. So I love that's what you brought in. I call it the body teaching. And basically what they were saying was, and this of course has unfolded through time. I didn't get all this at once, but what they're saying is that we have many bodies, which of course many spiritual traditions agree on that. Some think 7 bodies, some think 9 bodies, some think 3 bodies, but we seem to have many bodies, and unless they're resonating closely, we can't cross into a new paradigm. So what that has meant for me is mostly our densest bodies, which in my worldview are the physical body and the emotional body. And I think the nervous system sort of weaves those bodies together. But these densest bodies need to be in a close frequency relationship with, the astral body, the mental body, the etheric body, the causal body, all these other bodies that we hear about having. And for me in my journey, my densest bodies I had left behind. I was sort of in the idea of ascension or or just basically sort of numbing out from feeling my feelings or being afraid of the emotional body and being sort of at odds with the physical body. And what I've realized is I've had to go back and really do a lot of work with the physical body and emotional body so that I can kind of progress on the path at all. I often think of like part of us has its foot on the gas and part of it has its foot on the brake. And until we go back and work with the part with the foot on the brake, we're either not going very far, we're going to burn out or, blow our circuits, something like that. So that's what it's meant to me. And it has deepened all the way to grief and joy, even getting into these emotional body states that seem hard for us to access. And, so grief became a huge teacher for me. And now joy is becoming a teacher. So that's what that teaching means to me. And I feel like I have it enough because it's been 12 years that I can work with it. And that's how I work with it, is mostly with the physical and emotional bodies.
Is this teaching related to, you had mentioned consent to channeling, and I guess the way I was sort of felt is sometimes that there are some energies out there that are just so sort of foreign to us or different or uncomfortable or something that we almost have to make, we almost have to sort of, and this goes back to, placing your attention and the quality of your attention, almost that we sort of have to shift our own frequency in some ways to sort of more resonate with this energy coming in. And especially I've noticed that, for me, it's at night, at 3 a.m. sometimes it's just, well, I don't, I mean, you're much more articulate about the 3 a.m. energies than I am. So I should let you speak. But anyway, that's how it felt to me.
Oh my gosh.
And especially in relation to channeling. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm really so curious about your experiences. So, at 3 a.m. But yeah, what you're saying, yes, I think tracks. It's, getting the bodies into a frequency to be able to connect with other frequencies, with other sort of levels of awareness or of consciousness. Channeling in particular for me remains something that I keep at arm's length. I tend towards, because I had so much fear and so much kind of trauma around these experiences for most of my life, I do a lot of vetting. I make sure that the beings that want to communicate, I feel very safe with, and I feel like they can get me information without actually me channeling. And I also think that channeling is an amazing thing. I have friends that do it, and I think that it's maybe not very different actually than what I'm doing, and maybe it's just the word that I have still some fear around.
Sure.
But yeah, it is. There is something about frequency, and there is something about vibration. And these words, even, I resisted for such a long time because they have been used in a certain context, and my antidote to that, or my journey through that, has been to not abandon any part of the body, any self. It's a lot of inner child work. It's a lot of going into the emotions that I didn't, that are considered sort of negative or bad emotions, that are actually just calling for attention and awareness. And then when everything feels sort of resonant and there's no part that I'm trying to push away or get rid of, I do feel like I'm able to move into, either deepen into teachings or have different kinds of experiences, things like that. But yeah, again, I think it comes back to the body being a space of some kind, and then what we fill that space with, which I'm still working on figuring out. So,
yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I don't have that figured out by any stretch. It's almost like there's a part of me that sort of wants to to, to live in an animistic world and connect with everything. And then when I actually do connect with the numinous, it's like, oh my God, no way. When I run from the numinous every chance I get, but yet then I'll go back and it's like, I'll go back, and it's like, well, because this world, this consensus reality is kind of even stranger, and so I think that it's like I've got a future self, that's trying to, give me little chunks, little breadcrumbs along the way to get me sort of more, so that my vessel can accommodate more of this energy, or in your words, that my so that my frequency can change, so I can move to the new paradigm, perhaps.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
I love that. I love that, like, full understanding of and admission of that, like, we want it. I so want to be in the numinous. And then
No way. Except when you're in the numinous.
right. And when something arrives, or when something comes through the bedroom wall, or when, it seems to be this constant dance, between our corporeal human selves and this spirit or mystery or whatever it is. And it's in the dance, I think,
Yeah.
that, that
Yeah.
is, even though my human mind wants to collapse it and figure it all out and have all the answers, but the dance is really the only place that it works well anyway.
Yeah. Oh, well, there are so many more trails. I mean, I love you. I love the the little forest and mountain, and I'll follow you on any trail. I mean, here's just some ideas. Like, throughout your book, you talk about storytelling yourself into being. That's sort of a common motif that keeps repeating. But we can talk about red threads, because that's also something that that's in Zen practice, and I think that that's very interesting too. And you touch upon that in the book, but maybe do you want to go a little bit more into that?
Yeah, I mean, I would love. So the way that I operate in the world is, I know just enough to be dangerous, right? I've in the last couple of years, I've gone more deeply into spiritual traditions, but I've been aware of the concept of the red thread, but sort of only peripherally. And so I talked about it in my book as a sort of hand-holding device to get to, like, calm myself and everyone else down before we went into my dream journal, because
Mhm.
it's so it was such a narrative that unfolded in my dream life over about a year, and it felt very tangled to me. But as I read back through it, I realized there was a narrative there that was happening. I was not aware that it was happening. It was only in retrospect, when I went back and read it and realized that this story was playing out. These multiple stories were playing out in my dream life. Um, that I was able to put some pieces together. And so I invited people to kind of trust that there was a narrative thread through this very strange chapter in my book. But I would love to hear if you can share about the broader meaning of the red thread, or what it means in Zen.
Well, there's no. I mean, in Zen, it's not about talking, and this is not.
Mm,
The red thread is not really an official. I mean, it was kind of a subversive teaching,
mm,
as far as I can tell. That Zen kind of has the outliers too, the wild men of Zen, and this is one of them. That you cannot avoid the red thread, and it's the koan is, the red thread has been equated with um, the body, definitely the body, the visceral aspect of
mm,
the body, the blood, sex, semen, you name it, and that the enlightenment. In Zen is different than, but I mean, I think it's very consistent with sort of the somatic practices that at least you describe in your book that you're exploring.
mhm.
I would think.
Amazing. Yeah, it makes me want to look into it more. That's it. I often feel this kind of pressure in spiritual communities or traditions that I've been again, like peripherally involved with in the past. I never studied deeply enough um, to learn as much as I should have, but I always felt this call to transcend the body and to leave the body, and that these things happen somewhere else. And even from, kind of the beings, the language that they use, almost every one of my uh not everyone, but many of my clients, when we do what I call meet the guide sessions, where we go into this trance space and communicate with guides, many clients ask about very things that are in the world. What about money? What about love? What about these things? And the guides are always like, yeah, don't worry about it. Just do what you love. And it's like, that's great. But how do we do that? What does it look like in the body? How do these sort of spiritual ideals translate into this world, and in a very grounded way? And so that has been a huge, uh, that's where I feel the gravity, like my center of gravity has become the body, and how that we're not going anywhere without it. And my worldview is that when we're not incarnate, we have access to all this stuff much more easily. So why do we incarnate if not to experience what it's like in a body to do these things? And I want them to weave together. Like you say, I want the numinous, I want the mystery, but trying to leave the body behind, or even like kill the ego or things like that, don't resonate with me at all. So
Another thought that occurred to me when I was reading your book, that it seems that sort of I get the sense, and this is probably me projecting my experience onto you, so you can call BS on this, but anyway, it seems to me that um, this it was really painful in the book when you described that your sister, who's very close to you, said, well, maybe you should seek, maybe you should take some medication for that and see a psychiatrist, and then I've had people say that to me too. And usually well, anyway, that's a long story, but so it's really painful, especially when somebody that knows you, as well as your sister. And I really felt that in the book. And then, you talk in the book that you went through a period of therapy, I believe, in Hawaii for a number of months with somebody, and it was, blah, blah, I mean, it's sort of, it is what it is. But until you actually sort of connected with this experiencer group and everything, it seemed to be like there was a quantum shift in you, and sort of everything became alive and more vital. And the story you told yourself, going back to your quote about you storyteller yourself and being, the story of going through therapy is one of, well, I'm this uh, you know, I'm this, animal that can be trained to do certain things, cognitive behavior. You have to train me to do certain things certain ways, and then like our whole life is reduced to this, this prosaic, uh, there's no mystery of it anymore. But yet, if you live in it, and again, this is me, this is my experience, but to the extent that, like, you walk through a forest and are connected with nature spirits, if you're looking at it as nature spirits, not just like molecules in a scientifically reduced universe, but if you're actually connecting with stuff and communing with stuff and opening to stuff, the level of sort of your being resonates with that connection, and you become, again, going back to what we were talking about, where you place your attention and the quality of your attention. If the quality of your attention is placed upon all this connection of a vital, alive, animistic universe, all that energy, and your life just sort of opens up into all different things. And I got that sense with you, that when you sort of story told yourself of, something changed in you when you sort of uh, got with the experiencer groups and everything. And uh, I could be dead wrong, since you didn't really discuss that in the book, but I sort of got the feeling of that things really opened up for you and settled down, and you sort of found your tribe, perhaps another way of thinking about it.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, I hadn't ever, I didn't know any of this existed. I didn't know that uh, that people were having deep conversations about ufology and consciousness, and that these realms overlapped in some way. I had no idea that any of that existed. And when I found that community where I could talk about both my, strange states of consciousness and phenomenal out of body experiences, as well as my contact with seemingly, non-human intelligence and UFOs and things like that, that there was a space that could hold all of that, could hold all of my experiences. Everything really did change. I didn't realize I had compartmentalized. I didn't realize that I had split myself into these, into these parts that could only hold one thing at a time. But it was finding this space where everything could be held and was taken seriously, and also held very lightly, because there are no answers to the mystery. We can get, I've been able to get some framework and some ground and some guidelines that have been incredibly helpful for myself and others, but none of that pretends to solve any of these mysterious things. It's more that I changed, as you said, and that I was able to find this tribe of people. And I will say as well, this is a question that I get from clients of mine. It's a question that I had for a really long time. Sort of a struggle with people in our lives who don't understand. And what I've seen as such a huge part of my journey is this threshold crossing that happens. And until someone has had the experience, or until that threshold has been crossed, we don't know that there's anything different than the material landscape, than just a reductionist material landscape. And so, my sister, for example, who's, the closest person to me in the world, that was her biggest act of love. That was what she thought would be the most helpful, because the paradigm that we live in is that, and so I think it's slowly shifting. I think with so many things that are happening in the world, and with information coming out, even in, people testifying in front of Congress about UFOs and things like that, people are sparked and they're interested, and it's an avenue into consciousness. And there are scientific experiments being done that are avenues into consciousness. But moving from a worldview, changing a paradigm, is a really enormous, difficult thing. So I have a ton of compassion for people who just don't have the ability or the awareness, or the understanding to be able to cross that threshold. And then what I find is that the more we talk about it, I don't know, if I'd be curious if you find this as well, but the more that we can be open with experiences and talk about it, people are always like, well, nothing like that's ever happened to me, but there was this one time, or there was this one thing. And that there are doorways into these places of consciousness. And in terms of telling myself into being, that was the journey. I was having phenomenal experiences in a materialist worldview, and they didn't they didn't mesh. There was no place for them, and so I broke. I sort of split and separated, and it was the journey of going into a broader landscape that was how I told my story. How I story told myself into being was not, was with all of the difficulty and the struggle and the friction of living in a materialist world, and then opening up to the reality that there's so much more here.
Yeah, yeah. But and you mentioned the threshold crossing, and I guess it's I guess well, I'd be curious to get your reaction to this. Remember the Jimi Hendrix song "Are You Experienced"? This is
I'm
probably before
embarrassed
your
to say
time.
that I don't. Yeah.
Okay, I think Mr. Hendrix back in the day in the Roaring '60s was speaking with probably psychedelic drugs, and have you taken psychedelic drugs, or are you experienced? I think I heard some interpretation there, and so I think, and you're the first quote unquote experiencer that I've had on the podcast, and part of me just wants to say, and that I think that like thresholds are everywhere to be crossed. We can't. I mean, I can't go through a day. It's just that like we're so um, accustomed, and we're such a we're sort of in this zone that we just don't notice it, or we have we've got to take care of the kids, or we got to do this, or we got to do that. We're sort of we've hypnotized ourselves not to notice what's really going on, but we're really always experiencing everything, and we always have all the time, 24/7. And yes, there are aliens, but there have always been aliens, and they're not really aliens. You can call them spirits. You can call them, we've always had this, it's like, it's 24/7. And it's as soon as we actually can open up to receive it, as you describe beautifully in the book, the tremendous blessing that life has. And it's just, I don't know. I mean, that's like, that you want to talk about gratitude, in a way, but on the one, but the other hand, it's, the others, you can't have one without the other. They come in pairs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yes, they always have been. And there's, that's again, not knowing, I didn't know any of this existed. I didn't know how to think about these things. And I was lucky to come into the experiencer group and a community that was talking about, people like Jacques Vallée, who did this comparative work around the Fae and, UFOs and ETs, and how there's this overlap, and basically saying that there is a way that we experience the phenomenal world that has been with us since the beginning of humanity. And we forgot. That's I think what makes the most sense is that rational materialism isn't very old. We've spent most of our time as humans in in relationship to the animate world, and so we just forgot how to do this stuff, but we're remembering, and that's what the threshold crossing is.
And the rationalist materialist world and that view, that's a strong spirit. I mean, that has dominated our culture. You talk
Mhm.
about an alien presence that's come into humanity. That is something that is, I mean, we were talking about, just the Virgin Mary, the symbol of the goddess, and by the way, we need to talk about your goddess practices too, and
Yeah.
before long, but just that idea that like usurping the goddess, and this idea that that Mary, that the divine comes through a Holy Spirit as opposed to an act of the body. I mean, to actually think about that in a way, that's like high magic of the highest sort, where you're just ignoring the phenomenal real life gift of the goddess and procreation, and it's subverted just through this idea of a Holy Spirit.
Mm.
And this idea is yeah, I mean, to me, I think that even I resist the words almost of ideas, because it's those to me is uh, I don't know. I mean, I think it's all sort of an imagination in a way, and to the think that there are sort of these, I don't know. This is above my pay grade, but it's just that yet too. I I should stop. Go ahead.
No. Yeah, no, I hear you. It's so interesting. The goddess appeared for me alongside these other experiences that I was having that felt, I don't know, galactic or something, and felt sort of otherworldly. And I thought that that was such a strange thing to happen. And then I learned that it's a relatively common thing for people to experience these overlapping kinds of phenomenal experiences. So um, it's always helpful to have an experience and then later come across information that sort of supports that. But yeah, I think for me, the goddess just is saying, don't forget the body, like you're saying, don't forget the body, don't forget the earth. Um, our bodies are the body of the earth, and I really needed that anchoring. She really helped me anchor in. One of my teachers used the phrase, the mud and the blood. Is like, here we are in this body on this planet, and as we keep trying to leave it, or as we forget about death, forget about grief, or trying to push it away, that we are pushing her away. And she's fine, like to me, she's the center of everything. We're not going to end up pushing her away, but what it looks like when we try to push her away is what's happening on the planet right now. And so she's loud in my life, and she wants to, she sort of insists on being a big part of the conversation, and I'm really grateful for that. She's my grounding for sure.
Do you want to talk about the connection to animals that you've experienced along the way? The panther, the horses, the three birds, anything along in any of those little vignettes you'd like to reconnect with?
Yeah, thank you. Until you posed the question that way, I didn't have it organized that way in my head, but that's wonderful. Yeah, so one of the most powerful experiences of my life, and it remains so, and it remains a very close memory that's really easy to access. I was going through a period where I was having a lot of sleep paralysis was the best way that I could make sense of it, except for while I was being paralyzed, there were other beings. I left my body. I experienced a lot of terror, and there seemed to be more than just sleep paralysis happening. And I really resisted it, and it was a really, really difficult time because I couldn't make any sense of it. And eventually, after a lot of struggle and a lot of difficulty, I was having sort of a bout of this one night. And I always caveat this by saying this is not prescriptive. I'm not recommending that people do this, but what I did, I felt like there was nowhere else to go, and there was nowhere else to turn. There was nothing else to do. So I finally turned towards the experience and surrendered, and thought, okay, what if I just let whatever's trying to happen? And when I did, I was overcome by this really intense vibration and intense light, and just sound overtook everything. And I realized while I was having this experience that what I was hearing was every sound in the world at once. And when I realized that, I focused in on a particular sound, and I was instantly inside of the experience of what was making that sound. And I found myself having the experience of being inside the body of a black cat, like a big black wild cat, and moving through the jungle and feeling every step, sort of this electrically charged connection between the pads on my feet and the earth. And I could hear everything clearly. I had this sense of power and ease. And the sound that I had tuned into was the rustling that was being made in the leaves around me. So it was a phenomenal experience. It was amazing and overwhelming. And I really didn't have time to think about what was going on. I was just inside the experience. And then the vibration returned. And when it did, I sort of had the thought, well, I guess I could go anywhere. I could tune into anything. And when I had that thought, I started having an experience of dissolving, of my body dissolving. I found myself in this black space that I described as like this velvet, intelligent, alive blackness. It wasn't an empty void. It was quite alive and interactive seeming in some way. But there was nothing there. And I then felt myself, I described it as like champagne bubbles. Like I was made up of all these little different points, and I could feel myself begin to dissolve. And then a being nearby made herself known. I didn't see her. I just became aware of her and sort of pointed out this geographic no, not geographic, geometric sort of um, shape that was emerging in front of me, and it seemed like maybe a triangle that sort of necked down to a point, and I felt this pull and this strong sense that I was being pulled through some sort of gateway, and some of the little bubbles of me went through the gateway, and as I got closer and closer to it, I felt like I was sort of being vacuumed into this space, and as I got closer and closer, I knew just beyond a shadow of a doubt that on the other side of that is where we go when we die. And when I had that realization, I pulled myself back sort of violently and kind of landed hard in my body and sat up, heart pounding and sort of in terror. And then immediately put my head back on the pillow and went into this kind of lucid dream space where these beings, who I called the four who are one, rose up out of the horizon line and said, "We're here for you when you're ready." And the four who are one are the same beings, I think, that walked through my bedroom wall. They're the ones that I communicate with. But that experience of being in the jungle cat was, I can go there and remember it as easily as if it had happened yesterday. And so that was definitely a call into this kind of other world. And then, and then I had an experience with kind of being visited by three birds over a period of time when I was writing the book, when I was like resisting writing the book, actually. And it was like the volume kept getting louder and louder. And then it was punctuated by these three experiences with three white birds that by the time the third one happened, I just surrendered and said, "Fine, I'll write the book." and then I did.
When you encounter the numinous, and I've noticed, like, sometimes you surrender, like with the birds or the goddess. And then there's other times you're sort of more resistive, like with the mantis being that you describe, and it's a little bit more. And so I guess, and maybe this is too simplistic, but do you have an intentional practice toward the numinous insofar as whether it's surrender or a protective practice? I believe you talked about. I know you do protective practices before you go to bed and don't have nightmares when you do them. But just in terms of, generally speaking, if you find yourself now with the four who are one and they're manifesting, do you have a practice with them, or is a little voice saying how to encounter the numinous?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think one thing that has been a huge part of my journey is claiming agency and demanding consent, which I didn't know you could do with the numinous. But and I think in some ways, there are definitely things that still feel like they happen to me, and it still feels, sometimes scary. But for the most part, claiming my agency, which is just saying, I will interact with you in these ways. You're working really hard to get my attention and to interact with me. And so I get to have some say in this. And you can't keep me up all night, and you can't put 1,000, downloads into my head at once. And I'll give an example. The mantis is such an interesting experience because I really did experience what I believe is a miraculous healing. I had a big chunk of cancer in my neck, and had the experience of being healed from that by the mantis being, and of course enormous gratitude for that. It's just the most phenomenal thing I can imagine happening. And then he came, and while I was wide awake, this is one of the most profound experiences that I've had. He appeared and sort of paralyzed me, and then, shot something into my brain, like gave me a download of some kind. And then I lost consciousness, and I was so angry. I was really angry because what I was kind of meditating on and working with my guides later, and started to experience was basically he was saying, I've given you the ability to speak to the dead. That's what that was. And I said, no, thank you. Like, I have a lot on my plate and I would not like to speak with the dead. I maybe someday, but I don't want to do that. And so that was when I really put a hard line down and said, even though these are, the mystery is always enlivening and it is the most phenomenal, amazing thing and it's the most wonderful thing to come in contact with. I get to say as much as I can how much of this comes through for me. And so my practices now are I really trust the 4 who are 1. I trust my team. If I have an experience, I believe that they've allowed it and that I always have the ability to say no. So far, so good, right? Like I could have an experience tonight that blows that up. But ever since I've sort of claimed agency and demanded consent, my relationship with these beings and the numinous has changed dramatically.
Sure. This might be going back in reverse chronological order in your book, but you talk about in the book also suffering as a sacred calling and your 3 soul gifts. And most people I don't think would equate those necessarily with gifts. So but I would think that like how you you tell the story of yourself by seeing those as gifts is remarkably I don't want to use the word therapeutic, but it's it connects you with a different sort of energy and a vibration to make that a more interesting experience than not calling them gifts, perhaps.
Yeah. Thank you. Um, and some of this does feel like psychology, like psychological work, around development and parts work and internal family systems and things like that. Going back and seeing how these core experiences that I had as a child shaped me and gave me something to wrestle with and a place of friction to grow from, that they became developmental drivers. Of course, I knew, I was 2 years old or 12 years old or whatever, knew nothing of that. But those experiences that shaped me so profoundly became the playing ground, became the landscape for growth and for self-realization and self-actualization. And if we don't have those, then what are we doing? Like, what does happen here? I don't know. I think it's part of coming to this planet and being human is that we come in with a culture and families and experiences and a particular body and nervous system, and then things happen and we respond to those things that happen and grow from them. And I used I hope I don't misquote. I think it's a Mary Oliver quote when I talked about this that, is said that somebody once gave me a box of darkness and it took me years to realize that too was a gift. And that's what this feels like. This is how we can grow and learn and become through these challenges. And so, I had this, that in current lingo would be called like a disorganized attachment system from,
blah, 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 blah.
You don't want that. You don't want the psychological in there.
No. I think you use the words. I think I'm resist. I was resistant to those for That's me and like
Is
blah,
it?
blah,
Yeah.
mumbo jumbo, mumbo jumbo, mumbo jumbo. Go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's totally fine. Yeah, I get it. I have those places in me too that are like, but that basically I had experiences that, of course, that we all do, that affected my relationships, that affected the way that I interacted with people, what I felt like I needed. Also with addiction, finding this relief very early on from the world through cigarettes, actually, that I was able to swipe a pack of cigarettes at a very young age and sort of hide it away and secret myself off into the forest to smoke cigarettes. And the minute that I got this mind altering substance in my body, I felt relief from how sensitive I was. And so even though that addiction stayed with me through, probably still stays with me today, but sort of active addiction stayed with me until 8 years ago. And it was very, very difficult and challenging. It was one of the ways that I touched the liminal spaces, that I touched other aspects of consciousness, other ways of being in the world, and also created a lot of challenge that I then needed to overcome.
Yeah.
So those were gifts, even though they were hard. They were, but I think that's what happens here.
Yeah. Well, I would think the gift of your childhood and growing up as you did with, well, you call them hippie parents, going to Colorado, living off the land, and having such a intimate relationship with nature, and it's almost like you have this sort of childhood, and then sort of consensus reality comes in because you have to deal with the rest of humanity and our strange ways of the really strange ways of organized religion and all this stuff that is so unnatural in so many ways. And then how you I don't know. It's sort of like you have it reversed, because most people don't have that sort of intimate relationship with nature like you experienced young, and they're kind of questing for it now, and it's sort of different for you because you had it, and then the difficulty was the shock of dealing with everything else that we all do, and well,
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know that this isn't, that just wasn't what life was like for everyone. It was just the world that I was born into, and it fit, it suited my sensitivity and also cultivated my sensitivity, I think. Just being in connection with the natural world. And it was an absolute shock to my system when I went out into, I went to college, and I was so lost so quickly. I just did not understand what we were all doing and the point of any of it. I didn't understand getting a degree and then getting a job and then working until retirement and then having a few years and dying. Like I know that that's not the sum upance of a life, but that's what it felt like to me. I just couldn't understand why things were organized in this way. And it was really painful and it was really difficult. And I ran and sort of stumbled through life for a really long time, um, because I couldn't reconcile the sort of sense that the natural world makes. It's not safe, terrible. There's violence, there's death, there's all the things that happen in the natural world, but it makes some sort of sense. And the construction of like reality that I of the culture that I was born into just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And so it was really painful and confusing for a long, long time.
yeah, yeah, that's the yeah. I it's a strange thing, and I have this sense that when we to the extent we're alive now, and and then we change forms, whatever, that we're going to look back at this as that was really strange.
Yeah.
In so many ways that it's such an aberration that and that's just like we think of all these sites as numinous or paranormal, or that they're so weird, and we think people who experience them are weird, but yet that's like, I think that's I mean, I can't use the word, I don't want to have the language for it, but those are the same things, I mean, you
Right.
can't even talk about it, but I think that, like, when we actually do connect with some of the things that you do, like you've articulated so well in your book, that those are sort of where the magic is, where the rubber meets the road, and it's not the way we think it is. It's something much more mysterious, and it's not consensus reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the journey through that is, I think, what my soul thinks is fun. I think it's like, oh, it's interesting here. It is interesting here. And there's a lot of growth and amazing things that happen here. And it's hard on the body and it's hard on the self. This is not a place that's easy. And yet in my worldview is that we um do this on purpose because we think it's fun on some level.
Okay. It's a gift. It's a gift. It's a gift. I think we're all movable rocks. It's like, oh, we'll go back to being a rock now. It's like, but
Right.
it's kind of fun moving around there for a while.
Right.
um, so are you still working for the physician that does that assists people in the transition process? I mean, that seems like an interesting part. You don't really discuss it in the book, but I thought you would be like perfectly suited for that
Yeah.
sort of role.
Yeah. No, not anymore. I don't work for her anymore, but I did for 15 years work for a surgeon who performs gender reassignment surgeries. And that I think that the terminology has shifted since I've stopped working. I think it's gender confirming surgery or
Oh yeah,
confirmation surgery now.
I'm sorry if I
Yeah.
mischaracterized it. Yeah.
No. I think that I did as well. I haven't been sort of in that field in a while, but yeah. So no, I worked for her for 15 years. That was something that kind of came through in my first regression. Was I felt like I had this kind of contract to bring forward this to assist her in. Again, it was a threshold crossing, and when I first started working for her, uh, it wasn't in the broader culture very much. There was not activism around it. There weren't it wasn't just really in the world. And by the end of working for her, it was, it had come into the culture. And that when I was in the regression, that the guides told me, like, you had this contract to do this for 15 years to help this idea of non-binary in general come into the world. And it sounds very grandiose. I don't know if that's true or not. That's how I've made sense of it. And then, but I was very much white knuckling my desk job, which that's what this medical practice management, it was a lot of responsibility, a lot of weight on my shoulders, and it was not feeling aligned anymore. And so it's been about 3 years since I moved on from that job, and now I do past life regressions
Right.
and help people
Yeah.
cross these other thresholds. So, but yeah,
Well, let's talk about what you do now. I know in what you offer and how people can connect with you if they want to uh, experience the Robin.
yeah. Thank you for asking. Yeah, so I'm the community manager for the experiencer group. That's a volunteer role that I have, but it's the experiencer group for people who've had anomalous or paranormal or any sort of anomalous experience, from prophetic dreams to contact with non-human intelligence. And it's a support group. And that was the group that really changed and helped me and gave me a lot of the frameworks that I now use to help people cross their own thresholds. Even somebody who's had like a near-death experience or psychedelic experience, a journey with medicine that has anything that sort of brings on ontological shock, which is basically something that blows our worldview apart or our reality apart, and then how to integrate that into our lives. And that's what I help people with. And there's different modalities. I do past life regressions and things like that, also coaching, and I have groups. We do work with the goddess, we have women's groups and things like that. So this has become my whole life, I'll say.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that in the book I keep coming back to, because the Four Who Are One told me, if you write the book, it will bridge the gap between these two big parts of your life. These two big blocks of your life is what they said. And I was very suspicious of that. I didn't know if that was true. I didn't know if it was possible for me to move into a different way of being. And that's exactly what happened. And the book to me now feels like this sort of entity that exists in the world and connects people to me in really wonderful ways. But yeah, so now it's my whole life. All of this is my whole life, which is fun and interesting, and I'm having a good
Oh,
time.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the podcast, and you do. Did I read correct that you do hypnosis as well?
Yeah. So, the past life regression and meet the guide sessions, I call it guided journeying. Hypnosis is such a kind of charged word, but it's,
Sure.
same. Yeah. It's basically getting people into a very relaxed state and getting into a certain brainwave state, and then, inviting in this information that can be useful for helping people who feel like they have attachments or holdovers from past lives that are affecting their lives today. Or we create a space and meet the guides, which are kind of the most of the sessions that I do these days. And it's really a space to connect with the unseen team, with people's personal guides. And it's wonderful. Yeah, I believe that they're ontologically real beings, and that we can start building relationships with them to help guide us in our lives. And so that's that part of it. And yes, my podcast, same as my book, Earth: A Love Story. It takes up all my time, and it's it's fun. I know, I mean, podcasting isn't the easiest hobby to have, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. So is it the best way if people want to connect with you to connect with your website then, or
Yeah.
how do you recommend they do that?
Yeah, robinlassiter.com. Or earthalovestory.com takes you to the same place. And you can find me on Instagram, which I think is how we connected with each other. So
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, well, thank you very much, Robin. Is there anything else for the good of the order that you'd like to share that we haven't touched upon?
yeah, just gratitude. Thank you so much for having me on, and for doing your work in the world, and opening up conversations and spaces around these things that are not part of consensus reality, but hopefully will become more and more part of it soon. It's a pleasure to meet you and be on your podcast.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Robin. Have a
Yeah,
wonderful
thank you.
weekend.
Thank you.
As we were doing our worshiping of Apollo at
Right.
around the noon hour in the sun, and as opposed to the evening or the early morning, it's a whole different God set.
It really is. It really is.
Thanks, Robin.
All right. Thank you so much.
This is the End of the Road podcast with your host, Michael Coco. Exploring the horizons we never touch because we're already there.